My name is Brian Wish. I'm an entrepreneur, CEO, and pathfinder. If I've learned anything in life, it's that self-discovery is a critical part of living intentionally, building meaningful relationships, and achieving the future we see for ourselves. In July of 2021, I sold all my possessions, headed west, and began a quest to live a fuller and more meaningful life. The experience helped me truly understand the power of a single moment. And through my conversations with leaders from all walks of life, I've seen how that one phone call, heartbreak, diagnosis, or lost job can transform the entire course of our lives. In this podcast, I sit down with entrepreneurs, influencers, and experts across industries to talk through the events that changed everything. Together, we'll relive the make or break decisions, hard conversations, periods of despair and hope, chance encounters, and everything that followed. Vinay Patankar is the founder of Process Street, a company that delivers the future of no-code workflows and knowledge management to users. Salesforce, AirBnB, Yale, Gap, and thousands of other companies rely on Process Street to manage and automate repetitive work in their teams. Early in his career, Vinay served in roles in finance and recruiting talent until making the leap to entrepreneurship. In 2009, Vinay founded Bluegrass Technology in Hong Kong, which builds, manages, and consults on digital properties. He led the company for 5 years as CEO before founding Process Street. Vinay's life changed forever when he heard the call to leave home and discover a world of possibilities. Find out how Vinay found his path today on The One Away Show. Vinay, welcome to The One Away Show.
Hey Brian, how you doing? Great to be here.
Great to be here. You and this Aussie accent, right? Australian, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
That's right. Well, looking forward to diving in from all of our chats. Vinay, what is the one away moment that you want to share with us today?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, you just asked me this before, and I was kind of going through a few different options, but I think the big one, especially as it relates to my entrepreneurial journey, was the moment that I quit my full-time job in Australia and left to both start my first business and go travel the world. So that was the biggest shift in my life from kind of being in a normal 9 to 5 mindset to being completely like out in the wild on my own, no safety nets, fully responsible for, my future and my outcome. And in this mode of like, you're an entrepreneur, you've got to test and figure it out versus, you work for a big organization, you're in a big system, and a lot of things are already figured out for you, and you're just there to basically move the ball forward or just execute on something that has been designed by somebody else. And that mindset shift, as well as the pressure and the stress and the uncertainty, and also just the opportunity, right? You're dealing with like so much opportunity and optionality, is a very new way of operating and thinking. And there was a lot that I had to change around my mindset and my knowledge and my network to kind of make that work.
Take us back to I'm going to go off on my own adventure and figure life out days. So when you were in that corporate 9 to 5 mindset. I'm not so much talking about the mindset is the question, but I want to understand, like, how would you describe Vinay the person, right, at that time of your life?
Probably the more traditional example of like an ambitious young person. So I worked hard. I tried to make a good name for myself. I tried to move myself up the organization. I was your traditional kind of like, think of an investment banker or something like that, kind of like ambitiousness, right? Where I was I was coming in very junior. My first job was a recruiter. It was actually an SDR, basically. It was my first job. And I was super junior. And I was just like smashing the phones every day, trying to be on top of the leaderboard, staying late at work, working the weekends. Like that's how I thought that, you would become successful, is that you put in the work, put in your dues, work harder than everybody else, outperform everybody else in your team, get recognized, move your way up, get these incremental pay increases, of, whatever you're getting, 10, 20% a year, use that to buy a house, or start investing that money. And then over the long term of, slowly increasing your salary and slowly building out your investment portfolio, you eventually get to some type of like freedom or independence. And that was kind of the playbook that was the only real playbook that I knew, right? Like that was the only playbook that I'd seen. The only successful people that I were around me in Australia were, bankers and doctors and lawyers. And I didn't know any entrepreneurs or really understand like that playbook at all. And that's also the playbook that I guess is marketed more, because the entire like educational machine and capitalist machine, a lot of that is designed to create you know employees or workers, not actually business owners, right? And yeah, that was just all I knew, all I was exposed to. And so that was the kind of path or ladder that I was on, and trying to figure out how to work. I was still quite creative. I would try to figure out how to work that system, but it was kind of, I just felt like I was playing, when in hindsight, I was just playing the wrong game to begin with, even though I was good at like figuring out how to hack that game and succeeded at it.
I think we all go through that, and then we realize there's something more for us, that more opportunistic, can create a better life, and you clearly found that a bit early. Just before we get to the jump off point to Australia, what was driving that early ambition, right? I think it's so interesting, why people are ambitious at a younger age. Kind of what was the force behind you succeeding in the traditional way, as you said?
So when I think back, I actually did have like an entrepreneurial flair, right, from when I was really young, but I just didn't have any mentors or examples in my life that would kind of help shape that or grow it. So when I was really young, when I was like 11, I got my first job, which was like paper delivery. I would, hustle like candies, or I'd sell like single cigarettes at school. And I would just like, I sold like modded PlayStations and burnt games and movies, and like I had all these different little hustles that I was running all the way through school. And I worked lots and lots of jobs through school. Like I had more than 10 jobs before I finished high school or something. And so I always had this ambition and this hustle. What drove that is a good question. I think it's a combination of like, one, just my family struggling with money, that always being a point of contention, a point of arguments and drama in the house, and not wanting that, in my own house. And then also, like, my parents were really religious, and it was, I grew up in a very religious culture that I didn't agree with, and really wanting to have my independence so that I wasn't reliant on people who were like providing for me, but then also expecting that I align with like their ideology in, reciprocation to them providing for me, right? Like I didn't like that kind of power dynamic that I had with my parents, because there was always like, hey, you live under our house, you should follow our religion, kind of like, implied dynamic. And so trying to basically just have my independence so that I could take care of myself. And that also meant like taking back my kind of mode of free thinking, right? It's a big driver for me. Yeah.
So when you grew up in this environment, religious, sounds like more of a traditional environment. There wasn't, sounds like an abundance of money. Did you feel like suffocated and stymied in your own ability to think?
In some ways, I think that growing up in Australia is, for sure the most lucky thing that happened to me, right? Like being born in a first world country with a first world passport, in a place that is open to critical thinking and supports different religions and cultures and ways of life. So I was lucky in that, inside my house, there was this very, kind of singular culture. But outside my house, there was a very diverse culture, right? Where I imagine that if all my friends and everyone around me outside my house also thought the same way as my parents did inside my house and had that same culture, that would have been a lot harder and a lot more stifling. But the fact that I had so many diverse opinions and cultures all around me helped me to try to thread needles and say, well, how come these people over here are doing this and these people over here are doing this, but then you're over here doing this? And that allowed me to kind of like create comparisons between different mental models and cultures and ways of life, and help me understand that there was lots of options, right, and choices out there to choose from, and there wasn't only one way of doing things. And then that kind of helped me to explore those different options and decide what I liked and didn't like about them, and gave me that kind of knowledge, I guess, and data that there are different ways out there. I could imagine if I grew up in a where the entire country was extremely religious and everybody in the school and like everybody was all very aligned around this one ideology and mode of thinking, it would have been a lot harder to break out. But countries like Australia or America, like you're lucky that there's so much diversity in the countries and so many different ways of life that you can see other people living, and that can help give you inspiration as to what path you want to take yourself.
Yeah. Sounds like it wasn't North Korea. That's good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So Vinny, I appreciate
even China, right?
Or China, right.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you had any Chinese.
My parents actually
stay
live in
away.
China.
I appreciate all the context. I think it's helpful for the conversation we're having. So when you decided to jump off, you said, I'm leaving Australia. I'm going to go create the outcomes on my own terms. Did you have any idea where you were going to start? Like what did you do first?
The first thing that I decided to do was that I was actually just going to go travel. And the reason that I made that decision was, so firstly, I'd been working super hard in my job for a few years and I hadn't taken any vacation. And I got to a point where, like, by law, I had to take vacation. And my company was like, yeah, you have to take this vacation. So I ended up doing a 5-week trip around Southeast Asia. And that was my first kind of solo traveling experience. I went with some friends, but that was like, without my family or whatever, right? Like as an adult kind of traveling experience. And I had so much fun, and I spent almost no money because I was traveling around these really cheap countries relative to Sydney. And I got back and I'm like, why am I on this grind this whole time if there's so much fun to be had out there that is really cheap? And I got it as well. I was like, yeah, of course I want to be able to, create a future and be able to support my family and things like that. That's why it's important to make some money. But I also thought there's a lot more out there than just this life that I'm living, which is wearing a suit to work every day, getting in at 8:30 in the morning, being on this grind. And at that point, I'd done pretty well. I was like 23 and I made a bunch of commission and saved up some good money. I bought a house. I bought a piece of land and built a house on it when I was like 22. And I kind of got myself into a good position where I was de-risked in a lot of ways. I was de-risked by, I had already got a mortgage, which is one of the reasons you don't want to break your kind of employment record and take a 1-year break somewhere, is, that impacts your ability to basically get a mortgage. I'd also just been a top performer in my industry, in my career, which had a lot of other competing companies wanting to hire me, and I had a lot of options in terms of where I would go. So I knew that if I left for a year and came back, basically what I have today is still going to be waiting for me. There isn't going to be too much that I'm going to lose. And that gave me a lot of confidence to say, whatever, I can take a year. Worst case scenario, I'm back to where I am, and I've had a fun year. I also thought that taking the year now, when I'm, that'll be my year of being 24. Taking the year at that age is going to create an experience that you're not going to be able to reproduce in 10 years, right? Even if I stayed there and I saved up heaps more money, and then I decided to go when I was even more de-risked, maybe I'd bought 2 houses or something. I would now be in my 30s, and sure, I could do the trip, but it's going to be a different experience, right? And who knows, maybe I wouldn't be able to. Maybe I'd have a family or something by that point, right? You can't even guarantee that would be an option, or get sick or something, right? You can't even guarantee that would be an option in the future. So I'm like, this is a thing that I can do right now. I'm never going to be able to do again in the same way. And, that kind of convinced me to take the risk and take the shot. So I basically planned to just go traveling. I was going to do the normal. You've probably seen a bunch of Australians backpacking around. Like, at this point, that's a thing. That was something that I did have a lot of data points on, that I'd seen friends or friends' older siblings and stuff do these, long backpacking trips. It's like quite a common thing in Australia. So I did have a lot of, exposure to people doing that. So I started planning for that, and I started, for a 6-month period, winding down my apartment, quitting my job, or preparing to quit my job, getting kind of my whole life in order. And while I was doing that, I actually read the 4-Hour Workweek, the book. And I think I was researching books to read while you're traveling or something like that, and came across that book. And it had just come out. I think it came out like that year or the year before or something. And I basically read that, and I was like, wait a minute, I can run a business while I'm traveling on the internet. And I'd come from a tech background. It was quite a good crossover for me. I'm like half tech, half business. So the idea of like running an internet company wasn't very, challenging to me. I'd built some websites, and I had, worked with servers and stuff before. I had some background there. So I basically just copied the model in the book, and I started an e-commerce store in Australia. And I did that maybe 4 months before I left. I'd spun it up and started working on it. And then by the time I left, that was already in place. I'd already, had a product, had a site, had made, I don't remember, but maybe my first $1,000 online or something, right? Like by that point. And that was enough to basically have a product and project to work on, which I just continued to work on once I started traveling. And by the time I, would have run out of money after 9 or 10 months from my savings, I had gotten that to the point where it was making me a couple grand a month or something, and enough to kind of keep going and live in Thailand. Right.
Wow.
So that was the first business. Yeah.
So first off, I think it's fascinating that you decided to just leave and abandon the structure you had. I think it's awesome that you picked up a book that was clearly fairly transformative and spun up a product, leveraging your skills on business and tech. I also think it's very interesting given what you're doing today, which seems like an accumulation of everything, which we can talk about as well. I'm just curious, the 4-Hour Workweek, that came out like late 2000s or like 2008, 9, 10?
It's probably 8. Yeah, maybe 8 or 9. Yeah.
Did you know like that was an option? And then that's my first question. And the second question is, it's like, were you nervous at all you were gonna like run out of the money, or nervous at all that like what let you really kind of let go of the steering wheel, right? Because you did a 180 with how you were living.
Yeah. So first question, no, I had no idea that was an option or possible, or that people were making money like that. Like, the kind of the way that I knew people were making money on the internet was like you made Google or you made Facebook or something, right? That was the kind of those were the products that were making their way down to Australia, right? Or there were some of these things. Maybe you built a big job board, or some of these products that I kind of had used as a consumer, but had no idea how to even start something like that. And then this idea of kind of lighter internet companies was still very early back then. And there was a lot less infrastructure. I think that was just like Shopify's first year or second year or something launching. And, there was no drop shipping or like there was just like very little infrastructure. So a lot of the stuff that if you wanted to build an internet business, you probably had to be doing it in America. You needed your own warehouses and you needed your own servers and you needed your own like CMS. And it was just all like more complicated. And a lot of the services that you needed were in America, or you needed like a lot of cash to, get them done in Australia, and didn't understand what venture capital was or anything like that, or how to raise money and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I had no idea that was possible. And I think some of these things like there's been many examples of books that have like unlocked, a different direction for me. The other one, and this is jumping forward a bit more, but the other thing that unlocked a lot for me was just like going to conferences in America and meeting people who were like examples of people doing this stuff and hanging out with them and realizing that they weren't that much more special than me. And like actually just like seeing people and was like, oh, wait, you made $1 million last year. You're like just like me, right? If you can do it like this, I don't see anything like magical about you that makes this something that only you can do that I can't. Which is very common with like the light internet businesses. When you're like, oh yeah, you built like an AI LLM model or something, you're like, oh yeah, I can't do that, and then you can probably talk to someone and be like, I can see why you can do that and I can't do this after like a short discussion, right? Whereas in these more like light internet businesses, it's just like, yeah, you're just maybe less technical than me, right? Like,
Right.
I don't see a big difference there.
Well, first off, I appreciate that because, for us entrepreneurs, I think those books are the gateway to a lot of ideation and exploration. The second question was, you are living, it sounds like, with your hands pretty tight grip to one way of success, right? And you said, screw it, I'm going to completely abandon ship. And you had to kind of take your hands off the steering wheel, right? And like you couldn't follow the GPS that you had been following up until 22-23. I mean, were you scared, nervous, terrified? Were you excited? What was going through your mind at the time?
Yeah. So yeah, there was definitely this. I think I remember writing like a blog post on the flight when I left that day, around uncertainty and being able to deal with uncertainty. Definitely nervous and excited, but the main thing that meant that I wasn't, immobilized with fear was what I mentioned before, was that like I de-risked myself. So I'd already set up a system and a safety net for what would happen if it doesn't work out. And I think that gave me a lot of like comfort and allowed me to take bigger risks, because I knew that if those risks or if those bets didn't pay off, then I could still always go back to this baseline that I had set for myself before, and I wouldn't be going back and then like living on a street or something. I always knew that I could come back, and I'd set up my networks, I'd set up my numbers, I'd set up my the house and the mortgage and everything. And so yeah, I basically de-risked myself before I took the big bet. And I think that's actually a common thing that I've heard a lot of other kind of influencers talk about this, but I think it's actually a common thing where people think that a lot of entrepreneurs are out there just taking these wild, crazy risks, where they're like, yeah, let me just mortgage my house and put it all on black, right? That's not as common as it might seem in the movies, right? Where very, very clever entrepreneurs know how to manage risk, and they know how to manage capital, and they know how to manage like lots of complex things going on. And maybe they don't have that experience, especially if they're a young entrepreneur, but they probably have some type of like attribute that makes that a bit more manageable for them. And de-risking yourself through education, through your network, through multiple revenue streams. these are all through multiple products, through dropping your burn massively, right? Like, and going and living on your parents' couch and being okay with that. Like, there's a lot of ways that entrepreneurs will actually de-risk the situation so that if that bet doesn't hit, they're not, in a homeless shelter somewhere, right? And that's, but I think from the outside, I think a lot of people think that they are actually taking a bigger existential risk than they really are.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a smart way of putting it. You talked about, you did the de-risk comment here, but you also talked about before you left, you had bought a house, you had property, you had set up this, cash flowing e-commerce business that you were going to build. And then growing up, you have an abundance of, I think, a lot of these things in front of you. So my question is, you before you left, you kind of gave yourself a foundation. Were you forced to thinking with process to like get to where you wanted to go? I mean, I want to come back to more process conversations.
Yeah.
Like, how did you know? Like, process, I feel like, is something people figure out way later into their 20s or 30s, and like why it's so helpful. But it sounds like this was an early habit for you.
It started because I was building remote companies, right? So because I started this e-commerce store, but I knew that I was leaving to travel in a few months and I wasn't going to be able to stay in Australia and be in an office where I could have oversight over what was going on in the business. And I knew that I was, from some of the stuff that I learned in the 4-hour work week, actually, he talks about processes and systems, and that's actually how you can get a business to operate, without you spending all your time in that business. And also talks about using like remote staff, right, in different countries for time zone and cost management. And so I was building the business in that way where because I was traveling, it was a forcing function to have a remote team, to not be able to be in an office all day and do kind of micromanagement, which a lot of the time in the early days is a stopgap for process, right? That kind of the logistical nature and structure of my business forced me to have to start thinking about processes. If I'm going to hire people in another country, in another time zone, if they're going to be working throughout the night while I'm awake, then I can't physically be there to be watching what they're doing all the time and be micromanaging their work. And so I need to design processes to ensure that the work and the quality is at the level that it needs to be. And that just basically became a forcing function. So long story short, remote companies need more process earlier than in-office companies, because in-office companies can basically create these, they can kind of brute force their way through that work in the short to medium term to make up for lack of process, where when you're not in the same room as somebody and you don't have that same level of oversight over their work, then process becomes more important. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a big process or understanding the importance of process person and value that for a lot of my life. And I think it's interesting, right? I think a lot of people can see process as super restricting, but counterintuitively, it can be very freeing, without rigidity around it.
It's not a universal statement, basically. Like, the answer is it depends. It usually depends on, one, the type of industry that you're in, and then two, the team that you're in, right? So there's two different layers there. So one, there are some industries that are much more process driven than others. Like if you're in the airline industry, or if you're in like, nuclear power plants or something, then you probably want to be very, 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 very process driven. You don't want people like making up how to land a plane or how to like cool down a nuclear like element, right? Those are very, construction is a good example, or hospitals, right? Where it's like, you want process because the cost of not following process is people's lives or whatever, right? And then, as that's the most extreme, like when the process is not followed, people die. Then you kind of move down the risk kind of ladder, and you move down to like compliance risk. Okay, you don't follow the process, you lose your business license, right? And then you move into more like profit and money risk. Whereas like if you don't follow the process, lots of money gets lost in some way. Like you build a component wrong, or you lose a big customer that you have a service contract with because you don't follow the process, like that can cost you a lot. So process is more important in industries where there's a lot of regulation. If the regulation's close, and then the cost of not following that regulation, the higher it is, the more process there is, right? And then it's a similar type of thing inside teams too. So like inside teams, your HR team or your finance team is probably going to be more process driven because they have external regulations that they're complying to. Like you got to follow HR law, you got to follow payroll law, you got to follow tax law. These aren't things that you can be creative about. In fact, being creative about them is probably the absolute opposite of what you want to be, because you don't want to make up a new accounting standard to file your taxes in that nobody can read. That's probably going to result in you misfiling your taxes, right? And then being open for all this compliance risk or whatever. So even within an organization, some teams are more process driven than other teams. And it's usually teams that are like operating and executing these like repeatable processes, or that are dealing with external compliance and regulation. And then teams that are more creative, where they're designing products, or they're, solving these more like one-off particular problems that require more of a creative muscle, tend to be less process driven. And there's definitely scenarios where, and teams and projects, that having too much process is counterproductive to what you're trying to get done. But then there are other teams and industries where having less process is counterproductive to getting what you're trying to get done. So it's not an even distribution, right?
Yeah. No, I really like how you talked about risk factors, right? And, without the process, the severity of risk and what that could do to a life or a business, and practical and thoughtful way to, think about it. Let's get back to that in a little bit. I want to hear more about this journey and then where we've arrived today. So, you left, right? You started to follow the principles of the 4-hour work week, putting this e-commerce business. Kind of how you were on the road. I mean, when we talked that night in New York, I mean, you were on the global kind of globetrotting for a long time. How long were you traveling, around about?
I would class myself as a nomad for about a decade.
Wow.
It wasn't always the same. When I first started traveling, I was in much more of this very excitable, wanted to see as much of the world as possible. And I would maybe stay in a city for 1 or 2 weeks. By the end of it, I was staying in cities for 1 to 2 years. And that was a kind of progression of, I'd stay for a month, and I'd stay for 3 months, and I'd stay for 6 months. And like slowly, they call it slow matting is the kind of term.
Slow matting.
Yeah. So I started as a nomad and ended as a slow mad. But yeah, it gets difficult to continue to move. It's very disruptive. It's disruptive on work. It's disruptive on relationships. And then I think also just over time, I had more responsibility. So at the beginning, I had this small e-commerce store. I owned it all. I had a couple of freelancers that would work for me. It was low stakes, small team. Everything was asynchronous. And then once I started Process Street, and then I raised, tens of millions of dollars, and had a big team, and have investors that are trusting me with their money to perform, and me managing a much larger organization, that just added more restraints around time zone, around just, switching into a much more meeting heavy kind of type of work. That meant that I, needed to be in a more stable place on Zoom to be able to manage the business, versus being able to do it from a bunk bed in a hostel. It's also like, we sell to enterprise customers, and, doing a Zoom call with a Fortune 50 company from a hostel bunk is probably not the best way to close enterprise business, right? So just a lot of my logistics and dynamics changed that meant that it was more conducive for me to be in one place for longer periods of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get to Process Street, which I definitely want to dive into, you said you were slow matting countries 1 to 2 years at a time or 6 months. Top 3 cities and why?
Buenos Aires would be one. That's where I met my co-founder, Cameron. So also just super fun city. Barcelona would be one. It's actually where Cameron ended up moving to live, because we kind of did this same analysis and we're like, yeah, where is like the best place? 330 days of sunshine, only major European city on the Mediterranean. Amazing food, culture, still good like hub, like lots of good, cool startups and conferences and stuff going on there. Just a pretty hard city to beat. And then New York, that's why I live here, center of the world, most fun city in the world, especially if you speak English as your primary language. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, it's super cool. Just wanted to hear the hit list. Yeah, I've heard great things about Barcelona. I've been always wanting to go to Buenos Aires, so soon. So I want to hear about Process Street. I mean, I think it's super cool that what you've built. I remember, on that roof that one night, talking about it. Give us the overview of, why you started it, what it is, kind of traction to date.
Yeah. So today, Process Street is an AI-powered process management platform. So we're a full a suite of products that helps businesses manage their repetitive processes. It can be used for an individual team to focus on like one or multiple processes for that team. Like one of our biggest use cases is employee onboarding for HR teams. You can also use it for like all the processes of an HR team. And then we have companies that just use it for all the processes in their company. So it's the database of all of their SOPs and documents. It's all their workflows. It's a lot of their residual data from forms and spreadsheets and stuff like that. So there's 4 main products. We have a workflow product. That's our core product that we started the business with, that I'll jump into about how we started. Then we have a pages product that's like for storing SOPs or your company handbook. We have a forms product that's like Google Forms. And then we have a datasets product that's like a spreadsheet light type product. And they all work together to organize your data and documentation and workflows. We started the business with the workflow product, but really you would call it like a repeatable checklist. That was the very first thing that we built, where it was really just to solve this process problem that I was having. So I was running these, internet light companies. And when I say internet light, it's not that they're light from a business perspective, they're just light from a technical perspective. You're not really building a software product. You're more just using existing products on the internet to sell advertising or leads or resell products and things like that. So I was running a whole portfolio of 20 or 30 different websites that were all doing different things, making between, $100 and $5,000 a month, like for, each property type of thing. There's just a lot of moving pieces to manage. You're constantly making content, you're running ads, you're creating split tests on all these sites, you're updating products, you're updating the software. There's just a lot of these kind of ongoing repetitive tasks that happened in that business. And I was using, I had a team in the Philippines and India that was helping run most of it. And I was using spreadsheets, and Word docs to basically manage how all of this was done and try to get my processes organized. But the problem that I found with those products was they're very flexible, and they treat everybody like a collaborator. Like they give everybody a lot of freedom to go in and do things. Like a spreadsheet is a good example. Is you can kind of put whatever you want in a spreadsheet, and you can go and reorganize the columns, and you can change the column names, and you can kind of break a spreadsheet very easily. Like everybody has had this experience of opening a complicated spreadsheet and then breaking it and then not knowing like what they broke. And that kind of freedom to be able to mess with the process that way was one of the things that was causing me frustration. So I would have all these tasks that needed to get done, and I would send them over to the team to do overnight because we're in almost opposite time zones. And then I'd wake up in the morning and I'd see, some things in the spreadsheet that weren't the format or structure that was supposed to be, or maybe some other cell had been accidentally deleted, and the work hadn't been followed in the way it was supposed to be followed, and this ad was off by these things. And I'm like, and then they've all gone to sleep. And so now I have to like go through all the work and then write up like all the corrections that needed to be made, and then go back and get them to do it the next day. And I ended up just, sometimes just staying up until 6 a.m. because after 3 or 4 days of that, I'm like, this is taking too long. We need to just get this done. So then I'd stay up all night and work with the team and micromanage the team basically to make sure that the work got done the way that I wanted it. And that just became a huge pain point for me of like losing all this time, all these cycles, having these super late nights dealing with the team. And that just created a lot of frustration for me. And I was like, why isn't there software that can just do this for me, right? Like, why am I here basically repeating these same instructions, night after night, and monitoring if they've been done correctly? This seems like something that can be automated. And so that was kind of the original pain that I was trying to solve, and how we kind of built the original product. And we built it basically using my company as the first customer. We built it as an internal tool that way. Got my team using it on a daily basis, and then use that to kind of figure out the core initial MVP and value, and then we spun it out as its own product.
I had no idea you were pulling all-nighters to correct work. That was the origin there. But yeah, it makes sense on like why you turned it into a software. Now, with what you're doing, right? You talked about selling to more enterprise clients, Fortune 50. Is this because of like a global remote workforce and really being able to manage work? Because it sounds like this is a lot more than HubSpot, right? It's really like enabling a much more friendlier, it's probably not the right word, but just a more frictionless way to work, across time zones as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Time zones is a big one. Like, what you'll find is that all enterprises, all of the Fortune 500 are remote, and they've been remote forever, in that like they have many, many offices, right? So they have a distributed workforce, right? There is no sales team in a Fortune 500 company that's in one location, right? It doesn't exist, because like they have offices everywhere. They're selling across at least the country, if not the globe. And to do that, they need people on the ground in many, many locations. So all big companies they're not remote as in like everybody's working from home, but they have distributed workforces that are distributed across different geographic locations, right? So a lot of them have the same problem that a small remote team has, a large enterprise has, which is like, how do we coordinate our teams and work streams across distributed locations? So that for sure is a big use case for us and value add. The other is just the kind of economics of business in general, in that like, I guess there's a value prop perspective from our product, and then more of your general economics of business. So the value prop is that bigger teams have more process problems, because the more people that you have to coordinate, the more structure that you need to be able to coordinate those people effectively. Very small teams, companies of under 5 employees, virtually don't need processes at all, right? You all sit in the same room. You all kind of know what everybody else knows. Spending a lot of time to write all that down is probably not as valuable work as actually going out and acquiring another customer, or going out and just like building that next feature. But when the teams get bigger, and you've got individual teams of 5 or 10 or 20 people, then creating process to coordinate those individual teams, or larger multi-location departments, there's a lot more value in that. If you can get a 5% bump, a 10% bump in productivity across a 100-person team, that becomes real dollars, right? Where you're paying $50,000 a year for each of those people, you get a 10% increase in productivity, you just made $500,000 type of thing, right? So the kind of raw value of processes becomes more valuable as a business gets larger. So our product adds more value to larger businesses. And then also there's the dynamics of like acquiring customers versus how much you charge. our product is quite complex, and it's way more complex today than it was when we launched it. Now we have a professional services team, and we have onboarding and implementation, and we have complicated integrations and complicated 1,000-step processes that take 50 hours to design and build. And so when you've got more complexity, to be able to service that, we need to be able to charge more. And the kind of economics of charging really small businesses, a 20-person company, kind of the amount of effort that it's and support that they're going to need to actually implement and utilize the product is more than they're willing to pay us, right?
Mhm.
And so we either need to be able to acquire that customer for virtually free, so we need to use close to organic sources to acquire that customer, or if we're going to be acquiring customers profitably, we need to acquire customers that can pay us a lot more.
Yeah.
And only larger businesses can afford to pay us more. And so it's kind of a natural evolution for the product and the company to
Mhm.
move up market. Yeah.
Well, I think it's so cool, right? Like where we started the conversation of taking off around the country, learning process for yourself, and you've created an entity now, right? With a suite of products and services that enable others to do the same, and it's like very aligned to who you are in your own story and the origin of just your existing. Um, my question for you is, for so many years, you built the processes yourself. Then you started Process Street, raised all this money, built all these teams, servicing big companies. I'm sure you're not the one right now creating all the process. Your role has evolved significantly, probably just in the last few years. What is Vinay doing day to day, right? That's different from a few years back. Just kind of, where you focus right now with the business.
Running a startup is a different job every 6 months, basically. So as the team gets bigger and bigger and whatnot. So now my main job is I manage the leadership team. So I have a leadership team of 6 people. That they're my core reports. So like any normal manager, I do one-on-ones and I unblock them and I make sure that I can assist them to hit their targets. I'm also doing all the strategy stuff. So I'm doing our yearly planning and quarterly OKR planning and actually setting the main objectives for the company as a whole and for the leadership teams and the individual teams. I'm out there dealing with customers. So I'm working the top 5 deals of the quarter with our sales team, helping them to close those deals. I'm out, like I was just out last week visiting customers. So I'm going and just in meeting and spending time with our customers. And I'm usually working on like 1 or 2 parts of the business that I think needs the most attention. So right now I'm doing a lot of work in the marketing team, but that will kind of shift from quarter to quarter or year to year based on where the gaps are in our team and which part of the team is like needs the most help to hit their targets. Yeah.
This has been fascinating conversation, Vinay. My last question for you is, like, what's your vision? Like, all right, you sell this for tens of millions more, right? You achieve all the things. Like, what's the end point at this, or is there an end point? Like, what do you want for this and in your life at the end of the day?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that I'm going to need to go through at some point and do some deeper introspection, because I think, I remember I found like a bucket list from my 18-year-old, 20-year-old self or something, and I've done it all now. So I think a lot of the original goals that I've set out for myself I've already done. But I definitely see myself continuing to want to build things and add value to society through business and entrepreneurship. So being an entrepreneur, helping other entrepreneurs, that's my passion, and that's the area I'm going to stay in. I don't think I'm ever going to retire or not be running some type of business or organization. The shape and style of those may change over time, but that's what I see myself doing.
Yeah, awesome. This has been great. Where can people find you? Reach out, work with Process Street.
Yep, you can find us at our website, process.st. That's the easiest place. You can sign up for a free trial, check out the product. We got Twitter, Process Street, YouTube, Process Street, or me personally on, I guess, X, Vinay P10.
Cool. Awesome. Well, this was great, man. Really appreciate you making the time. Excited about what you're doing and always enjoy our chats. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. Appreciate it. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you for joining me on the One Away Show. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, please leave a review and follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Have a one away moment you'd like to share? Follow me on Twitter or Instagram at BrianWish_, or reach out to me on LinkedIn and tell me about the moment that altered your life. The One Away Show is produced by Arcbound, a company dedicated to helping entrepreneurs, experts, and visionaries launch authentic personal brands. From message development to podcast production, social media content generation, and book writing, we work with you to create your arc. Head to arcbound.com to learn more. Thank you for listening, and please join me next time on The One Away Show.